We'll start at 7:02 for those of you who just showed up just on time, because I know people sometimes struggle a little bit with the Zoom thing still. Yeah. All right. It is 7:02 here on the East Coast. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Fogg, calling in from Boston, Massachusetts, which is also where we host most of our programming here at Futures Forge. I'm one of the founders and the lead facilitator. So I lead like teaching, curriculum, research, stuff like that over here at Futures Forge. And so I'm the guy out of the group that's going to talk to you today about how to develop the skills that, as a young person, you need to advance your career in the future by performing brilliantly in college and your career. And so I'm going to talk through some of the science behind it. I'm going to talk about like, what skills matter. I'm going to talk through some of the science about how to improve them and what some of the things that you can do, including without us, right? So some of the things that you can do on your own and with other organizations to be able to improve them. And then we'll talk about our methodology at Futures Forge and sort of what it looks like when it's distilled down. The first thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about why we at Futures Forge are qualified to be telling you about this in the first place, right? So why are we the guys who can say we know what it takes to perform and we know how to make that happen? So the people I want to introduce to you are myself and Nat Green. Nat is our CEO, Mr. Visionary. He and I work together, of course, pretty much every day to make Futures Forge happen from both the curriculum side and the running it side. So these are both pictures of us running our programming this last summer. And Nat's making an interesting point over there on the left. So Nat was born in Hong Kong. He went to the University of Oxford for his undergrad, University of Cambridge for his master's degree. And his company that he founded, Stroud, is a boutique consulting firm in Marblehead, Massachusetts, near Boston here. And what they do is they have consultants that fly around the country and fix factories and like solve what are known as like sort of impossible problems in these factories or refineries or any industrial facility. They recruit out of the Ivy League. They take 3% of applicants, which is a vanishingly small number for anyone except the sort of McKinsey world, which is where Stroud plays. And what they do is they get these Ivy League grads to be able to, 2 weeks after showing up at Stroud, to be able to go to a factory more or less on their own and be able to go work with the team that they've never met and be able to solve problems that team has been trying to solve for years and has failed to. And this 22-year-old is able to solve them in a few weeks. Now, being an Ivy League grad helps, right? Because if you're an Ivy League grad, it means we know you're smart, at least because the Ivy League recruited you. But the 2 weeks of what goes on at Stroud to get that started and just the whole culture there of performance is obviously a big difference maker, right? Even Ivy League grads, most 22-year-olds aren't able to go do that. And so he developed a methodology for performance for young people that has worked really, really well in the consulting industry. You'll see a little Stroud over here on my side, on the right side. So I was recruited into Stroud out of MIT. That was where I did my undergrad. So I worked with Stroud for 5 years, obviously learned a ton. That's where I met Nat. And I've had a number of startups along my journey, a little consumer one called DrawTop, Helmet Hub. Prod Perfect was the one that I exited. So we raised 25 million from VCs, had 60 people there. I was the chief operating officer and head of people. And so I took a lot of the training development side from Stroud to be able to get performance out of talented people, and made that work at Prod Perfect before we exited it. And then I also want to share just Nat and I wrote a few books together on problem solving is one of them. I was the ghost. He was the lead author, and on politics, on political polarization, actually, just trying to understand the roots behind that. We wrote this 10 years ago. It's still relevant today, obviously. And then some things we do for fun. Nat's an adventure guy, so he likes skiing. This was him actually cross-country skiing down in the South Pole. I'm a nerd. This is me dressed up as Captain America in a costume that I built. And so we decided in 2022, we wanted to build a way for younger people in high school and in college who aren't necessarily working for a company that we run to be able to develop these skills. So this is a little bit of the story of how Futures Forge came to be, but I'm going to tell it from a more abstract angle, because one of the questions we asked was if we can take what we did really well at Stroud and Prod Perfect, if we can take that and actually scientifically break it down, like what is the thing that's going on? Because we know it's repeatable. So there's something going on. If we were to scientifically break that down into components that we could translate somewhere else and not just say, hey, we know people who do this, what would that look like? And so we looked in a few places. One of them was, what are the skills that companies are most looking for? And the reason this is so important is twofold. One of them is that just the market is going to give you a good sense of demand if you ask it. And so the demand for skills in the workplace, this is in high complexity work. This is everything from like engineering to marketing to management, et cetera. If you ask the marketplace what they're looking for, they're going to tell you what stuff is really hard to find. They're going to tell you what stuff is rare. And if it's rare, it means it's important, right? And if it's rare and they're complaining about it, it means it's important. And the reason I say that is that it may be that like concert piano skills are pretty rare in engineering and consulting, but they're not important enough to make it to someone's radar. So if you say, hey, what are you struggling to find? What happens? Big thing we see, so this is from the Society of HR Management, we see like a majority of employers are very dissatisfied when they're recruiting out of college, finding critical thinking skills, communication skills, listening skills, and this is actually covering this. All right, yeah, interpersonal skills. I had to move this thing around. And a big part of the problem, if we look at Brookings Institute, there's just a lack of experience in schooling in developing a lot of these, right? Even indirectly, these don't get developed. And so even students coming out of top colleges are lacking a lot of the skills that employers say they really need. And intuitively, this makes a lot of sense, right? Intuitively, it makes a lot of sense that we learn a lot of knowledge, right? You get an engineering degree, you're very good at engineering. You get a liberal arts degree, you're very good at like writing and potentially making arguments about some certain topics. But it hasn't actually made you a critical thinker. Now, some people will say, doesn't college help you think? And there's actually some good studies that show that is somewhere between like marginally true and not true, depending on the university. So you learn a lot of knowledge, but you're missing a lot of these skills that employers really need. There's a few other ways we can look at it too. I love this study from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I'm going to send this out. So there are citations at the end of this deck, and you can go follow all of them to see the reading that we did, because all that stuff's public. It's also on our website. So one of the reasons this is my favorite, and this is just one example. This is one example of work in the industry that reflects a lot of others. And so PricewaterhouseCoopers works with the Fortune 500. They said, hey, Fortune 500, what is the stuff that if you look on the x-axis here is difficult to find, and on the y-axis is very important, right? And so stuff that's very difficult to find and very important, if you have that, you will stand out, right? Because it means everybody's looking for it. It's really important and they can't find it, right? And that's basically supply and demand. So it's very, very low supply, very high demand. And if you've got it, you're going to be very, very valuable in the workplace. So what are the biggest things? Leadership, creativity and innovation, problem-solving skills, great, and adaptability, which was, frankly, a surprise to us when we first read it. Although as we got deeper into the science, we became less and less surprised. Get a little further out here, collaboration, emotional intelligence, risk management, great. But then we look down here, and this is where like jaws will drop every time we see it, because everyone harps on about STEM and digital skills, right? Almost everywhere you look, when some pundit or some consultant or an educator is talking about what are the things that young people really need to be learning for the future, they will say STEM and digital skills. And now I just get to smugly kind of look at them and say, how do you know that? Right? And people say, oh, but of course it's just true. It just must be true because everyone knows it's true. But if you go ask out in industry, what's the stuff that is really going to that like top employers are pulling for and begging for? It's not here, right? So maybe 40% of them think that it's difficult to find, so they're not totally saturated yet. And there's a lot of skills that don't make this list at all, right? That fall outside of this. So it's still somewhere in like the top 10. But only 30% say it's very important to have these. Because there are a lot of roles that there are lots and lots and lots of roles that are not STEM at all. STEM is great, but it is like just one of many, many paths to success. Whereas what's implied up here is that there are many paths to success in terms of like your specific knowledge, right? Whether you study STEM or whether you study a non-STEM knowledge set. But there is one path to success, and it has many parts to it. I clicked accidentally here. It has many parts to it. And so I think that was like the most profound insight we had. But there's a lot of other stuff that goes into this, and you're going to want to know it. So on the left here, we're not going to read through all this. You can read through it afterward. McKinsey has 52 skills that are it's very McKinsey kind of graph. They want to be very completionist. They have 52 skills that are very important that are broken down into these, but they're like cognitive, psychological, team-based, right? Makes sense. And we, this went into our methodology. The World Economic Forum, 10 years ago, I love bringing this up actually. 10 years ago, they had their top 10 skills of the future of 2025, which is going to be next month, or sorry, 2 months. And you can look at this, and they've updated it. They've updated it. It's still accurate, but some of this stuff, there is, they see technology as, of course, important, but you see these like abstract cognitive and psychological skills and traits, right? Resilience, flexibility, creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, right? We see a lot of this stuff over and over and over again. And so that's what happens when you like survey a lot of people. What do they keep saying? They keep saying like abstract cognitive skills and abstract like psychological and social skills. And those are the things that we need. And there's like a limited list of them. And so the good news in this is like, if you do the research, you can look and find out like, great, this is the stuff I need to be, this is stuff I need to do to stand out in the job market. If I can demonstrate that I have these skills, we know based on the data that I'm going to be highly attractive in the job market. And certainly the implication is that employers think, and these consultants think, it will make me perform. It will make me a very good employee. And if you're in high demand and you're a good performer, right, it means you're going to make a lot of money. Now, there's a lot of reasons we know that, some of which are intuitive, some of which there's some good science behind it, but I'll share a very brief example, which is software engineering became just unreasonably valuable. Reasonable according to the market out in the West Coast up until about 2022 when the market reset a little bit. But you could have people just coming out of a boot camp for 3 months, no college degree. I was literally hiring them, no college degree, coming out of a boot camp, and they were making 6 figures, right? 19-year-olds. I remember we hired one, and we were far from the only company doing this, right? And it's because it was in such high demand. And it was so hard to find good software engineers. And there's more to it than just coding. There's problem solving as well. But this is how we know, if we know what people want, and we know it's like it's difficult and challenging to develop, it's going to be worth a lot for us in our careers. But there's another angle to this that actually gives us even more confidence in the set of stuff that we want to develop in young people. Um, and I'm going to start with these attributes on the right, and then tell you sort of where we got them. So grit or resilience, we're using them interchangeably. You saw that in some of the previous stuff. Personal integrity is actually on this list, which is interesting, right? Basically honesty. People who are motivated, people who are conscientious, adaptable. We saw that key point about adaptability and flexibility and emotional intelligence. We saw that in the previous surveys as well. As well as if we go look on the left, the skills that we really care about at Futures Forge and that we know drive performance. This largely comes from the research done in industry. So the ability to keep learning, communicate, work on a team, be self-aware, innovate, problem solve, critically think, and execute. Those are the key things over there. But where do we get these attributes on the right, and how do we know like how important they are? This was like the big breakthrough moment in developing our pedagogy. And there's enough in just this to be worthy of an hour lecture. And I, one, don't want to talk at you for an hour. I want to talk at you for maybe half an hour. And two, we're not going to just talk about this. So again, I'm going to send you the citations on this. But the short version is, over the last 100 years, organizational psychologists have been really interested in figuring out what makes someone a really good performer. And a lot of this comes out of like the business schools, right? Because recruiting is difficult, right? Recruiting feels like kind of rolling the dice. But we don't want to roll the dice in recruiting. We want to find people who are really good. So we want to find ways to measure them, like leading in. We want to find things we can measure about them that will tell us whether they're a good performer. And so what they did was they looked at a bunch of good performers and a bunch of not so good performers at work, and they measured all sorts of stuff about them. And you can measure these attributes about people, how resilient they are, how honest they are, how motivated they are. And you can find out what are the things that really matter. And of course, the thing that matters most in complex work is like, are you smart? Right? If you're smart, you're going to perform better than someone who's not. If everything else is held equal, right? We all know smart people who struggle because they lack resilience, they lack motivation, they lack emotional intelligence, right? We see that and we go, it makes sense. But being smart's the most important thing if we measure it. And then there's resilience, integrity, motivation, consciousness, adaptability, emotional intelligence. After that, it drops off a little bit. And so we're able to look at this and go, dang, it's sitting there right in front of us, clear for all of us, that these are the things that we need to develop in young people if they're going to be more successful in the future, right? This makes for better performers. And most of these intuitively make sense, right? Someone who's resilient and someone who's motivated is going to do better than someone who's not. Some people ask about the integrity thing because we see dishonest people successful. But we also see some emotionally unintelligent people be successful out there as well. They've got other traits that make up for it, is the answer. Now we know what we want to develop. Right? And it's kind of a daunting list. I'll actually go back to them. It's like, oh, only 14 things, Eric? Great. Thanks. Right? Wouldn't it be easier if it were just one? The reason I actually like having 14 is that you don't, like, the point is you don't actually have to be awesome at all of them. There are a lot of different directions that you can go with what are going to be the like suite of things that really make you stand out. Right? Some people are just like the best analysts and problem solvers on the planet. And they need a lot of grit and conscientiousness, right? And maybe some like mental flexibility. They don't actually necessarily need to be the most emotionally intelligent because they're not trying to like be a manager. But if you are a manager, right, you actually don't necessarily need to be the best executor, critical thinker, or problem solver, right? Your job is to figure out other people and empower them and get them to do this. So you have to be decently good, right? You have to be better at some of this other stuff. And so you want to get better at all of these. And the good news is you can get better at all of these. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. The reason there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here, and it's easy for you to get better at all of them, is that, and this frustrates me to no end, it's not developed in school. And so this is my like arbitrary chart that I made of like, yes, we develop it because we're designed to. And I'll talk about how, of course, but I'm going to talk about how you can do it yourself first. But like, school maybe makes you a little bit grittier, right? Because you got to work hard. You know, they teach some computer skills. They teach a little bit of critical thinking, but it's not as good as you think. little bit of teamwork sometimes, but we saw earlier from the Brookings Institute thing, like most students come out never having really worked as a team. Sometimes there are group projects, but there's always the smartest person who's willing to work the hardest does all the work. It's not really a team thing. They don't learn teamwork. And certainly it's the case that these skills and attributes aren't being developed directly. School is there to teach you knowledge, right? Each class is like, this is the science class. Our goal is that you come out knowing more about science. This is the writing class. You could say writing is a skill, but our goal is that you come out knowing how to read, knowing how to write, knowing this language. Not that, that no class is there. The goal of this class is to help you be motivated, adaptable, a great problem solver. But this is the stuff that really matters. Now, of course, if you can't read, you're in a lot of trouble. But it's certainly the case that, I've forgotten all of my biology. I forgot my high school biology, and I've forgotten my MIT biology. And it's because I'm not in biology. But if I'd forgotten how to be gritty and adaptable, I wouldn't be running a startup. So we've looked deep into the science as well about how to develop these, right? Because if you can measure someone's adaptability, you can measure how it changes when you intervene, like when you do stuff, right? And so this is classic science. We measure before, we measure after, we see what changed. And the really good news is that there's a lot of overlap between how to develop each of these like cognitive skills and psychological attributes. By the way, I hate to interrupt myself. I see some questions popping up in Q&A. Keep writing them. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Keep writing them. I am going to get to them, all of them at the end. We'll have plenty of time. So please go ahead, hit the Q&A button, jot down anything as it comes to mind, and I'll come back to it. If I can even come back to the slide if I need to. So thanks for letting me interrupt myself. So, but the good news is these attributes and skills largely get developed by the same central pedagogy. And we call it catalytic learning. I think it's a cool name, and because nobody else has really named the thing. But it looks a little bit like this, right? You get introduced to a challenge that you're going to face, right? You're going to get it's going to be based on applying it. There's very little classroom learning for this kind of stuff. You can't do sit-down learning to teach someone to be resilient or to be a good problem solver. There's some reading you need to do, right? So you do some self-directed learning, right? They can sit there and read about it. They answer some questions. Like we literally wrote a book on problem solving. You can read it. It will not make you a good problem solver. It'll tell you the stuff you need to do to become a good problem solver. And it includes this pedagogy as well. And so what happens is there's some learning that goes on. And the reason it could be self-directed is that the students know that there is a challenge, right? There's already this kind of natural motivation. We keep it competitive. And what I recommend is that it's, say, a little bit competitive, mostly for fun competitive, though. So they're motivated to win. So yeah, we need to figure out how to do this. And I'll share some examples in the future. They plan for it and then they take it on. And so again, I'll share some examples, but they have to take on some kind of team-based, project-based challenge that has a clear, victory condition, but not clear instructions for how to get there. Because then they have to do some critical thinking, some problem solving. They have to be resilient. They have to be adaptable, right? Or if they're not, they're going to get crushed pretty hard. And at the beginning, that's actually a good thing, right? You kind of hit a wall. And the reason that hitting a wall is actually very helpful is that you can see, if you're in this competitive environment, you can see what other teams are doing differently. You can go, if only we'd done that, I wonder why. And then you're ready and open for the real learning, which comes through coaching, feedback, and other forms of integration, right? So it can be team-based feedback. It can just be asking somebody what they did differently, and you going okay, cool, I'm ready to see that and integrate it, and use it next time. And iteration is the thing. There's a loop that's actually missing from this. Iteration is the other key thing that really matters here. Is that after you've had this challenge, after you've found out, okay, we did some things well, we did some things not so well, what do we change for next time? And let's go do it, and do it before we forget, right? So this has to be repeated. So it's imagine a school that was this. It's pretty radically different. This is the school we build, and it's a lot of fun to run. But luckily, there's a bunch of other stuff that does this too, right? Not everyone can come to Futures Forge. Just the timing won't line up, etc. And so what I was most excited about when developing the post, after we launched Futures Forge, and we knew the methodology worked really well, and we got great feedback from it. The thing I wanted to do was also like help people understand how do you get a taste of this pedagogy elsewhere in a meaningful way. I'm going to send this list out. But the basics or the common threads in a good extracurricular that is going to help you learn adaptability, grit, problem solving, etc., is, as I mentioned before, you want something that's team based, where it iterates, where there's like iteration in either the competition or at least like the lead up, the check-ins leading up to it. And generally like a challenge that is like ill-defined and doesn't have like too much guidance, too many instructions, right? No hand-holding. It's got to be a hand-holding free kind of thing. And it also needs like some people who know more than your student does or you do, giving you feedback and giving you coaching and asking you questions, right? So that as you struggle, as you get stuck, as something goes wrong, someone can come in. Like that's actually the magic moment when you struggle, when you fail. And then someone goes like, hey, have you thought about it this way? You're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't, right? And so that feedback is like kind of the magic, the spark that maximizes learning, but all this other stuff beforehand is necessary, of course. And then what I would add, what I always make sure the students I'm mentoring add is that after feedback, after the competition, after things go well, write stuff down. Like when I say journal, I don't mean like, dear diary, today was hard, right? I just mean like, hey, what happened today and what did I learn? Writing it down is really, really powerful for actually deepening it in your mind. If you look through kind of like what were the habits of the great people through history, like Lincoln or Edison, etc., like one of the things they all do is write down what happened throughout the day and what they learned. So that's an easy win. And then you want a peer feedback culture. So this is like, it's really hard to develop this without being first exposed to how feedback works well. But if you can do it with your team, you're going to get a lot more out of the experience, right? So I mean constructive feedback. I mean like, well, and reinforcing as well. Like, hey, Eric, here's what you did well, and here's what you could do better. I've actually got one of my teammates on the call, and you know what he's here for? He's here to tell me what are the things I did well and what are the things I did better, because it rapidly accelerates your learning. So I'm not going to read these examples to you. I'm going to send them, but it's everything from like robotics to Model UN, and there's some stuff that's like a little bit less known. But these are all like really, really great ways to develop this. In high school, I was part of a robotics team. Looking back, I think it was an excellent way to develop my problem-solving skills and my grit and adaptability. A robot just broke in the middle of the competition one day. All right, it's hard to simulate that in a classroom. So I'll very briefly touch about how we do this in Futures Forge and then get to Q&A. So we have 2 tracks. I mentioned the challenges already, and we make them very work-related. We make them like look like what you'd be doing in the work world. But we put people in teams, and we have them run at these challenges. And our big thing that we do is like we make these challenges far more difficult and like expansive and grand than almost anyone would let a high school student get their hands on. And again, I'll share an example in a minute. But also we want people to know more about the skills and how they work, because it turns out actually like if you look in the methodologies of here's how we made people more adaptable or made people better problem solvers, them understanding the theory is really important, right? So like, what is adaptability? What's going on in the brain when we're more adaptable versus not, right? Like let's simulate kind of like a model of like, hey, event happens, here's what adaptable people do, here's what non-adaptable people do. And people are like, okay, I get that conceptually. Now I have a chance of being able to consciously apply it. And so we go through these skills workshops to help people, to help our students, identify and understand what those are. Here's me giving a quick skills workshop last summer. And I'll share 2 examples of some of the challenges that we had. Here's some students, excuse me, some of our students presenting. These are some of our facilitators. So we've got like Tufts, Dartmouth, MIT students working with me. And they're going to give feedback. And so these students are presenting on their solution for a startup crisis. And so the startup crisis is like, it's a product market fit problem. It's a case study that I developed, derivative of some others. And what happens is the students are given a startup where they've developed a product, but like people aren't buying it, even though the company's marketing to them. And there's a little bit of data available, and it's like, hey, we don't know what's wrong. We hired you, this team, as consultants to help us figure it out. So help us figure it out. And the team's job is to ask the startup people questions as part of their in this like kind of simulated case study, and like research stuff and propose ideas and etc. But one of the things that happens at the beginning of this is people go, I don't know what product market fit means. I've never even heard of this. How am I possibly supposed to be able to figure this out in 5 hours? It's like, well, step one is probably research. What does product market fit mean? And learn what it means. And that becomes step one. And like when the student gets that, they're like, holy smokes, this is like a whole wide world of stuff that I don't know how to do yet. Right. But instead of like the school model of, I'm going to tell you all the things that you need to know, it's okay. If you don't know it, figure it out. The information is out there. Right. Don't depend on me to do it. I actually think there are a lot of ways in which school unteaches some of these key skills. Because when a student looks at me and goes, I don't know what product market fit is, like the obvious answer is to Google it, right? But there's like a mental pattern in their mind, which they have been taught in school that they like should not be using, which is why they don't use it. Because all the kids that come to Futures Forge are very smart, right? We're pretty selective. So anyway, a lot of them then come back with really good solutions to fixing the product market fit problem of a novel startup, which I think is it's like this is kind of like my favorite part is seeing students are capable of so much more than anyone lets them get their hands on. Another one that's like a little more fun. This is actually the first challenge that we run during the session. Is it's building a roller coaster on a budget. And so the goal of this roller coaster, we're doing a different one next year, but it was to have a marble sit on the roller coaster as long as possible, and then fall into a cup. And everyone's like, okay, cool. And they're waiting for like the reveal where they get their limited set of materials, right? Like maybe the marshmallows and the straws or something like that. But what we give them instead is $40 in cash. And the students have this moment where they're like, their brains are kind of cranking a little bit and they go, oh, we're responsible for deciding what materials we're going to use and buying them. And it's not just that you have to buy them. It's that we were on Boston University campus. We're going to be there again this year. And there's like some hardware stores nearby. And so they have to think about what's available at these hardware stores. So now I have to think about managing my time. I have to think about amidst the like vast set of resources that I could get at, or there's also Target, like a Target or Ace Hardware. What are the things that we should even think about getting? How do we start paring that down quickly? Right? There's this kind of like iterative process, this co-participatory process of like design and materials acquisition, where like the materials constrain the design constrains the materials, right? So all of a sudden, like the aperture of this challenge is cracked wide open, right? And so we do this in order to kind of like set the tone of like this is different. This is not school. And those of you who have done stuff such as FIRST Robotics, right, you can see some parallels here. It's a really good way of learning. And then, of course, the thing we do, I think, that is really unique that like FIRST Robotics is going to do a little bit of, Model UN is going to do a little bit of, is we do some really intense coaching between these challenges. Some of it's with teens and some of it's one-on-one. And this is where like we really make sure that like, it's sort of like all the juice is sucked out of the fruit. Because like these experiences, like you can kind of lose what's the point? What are the things that I can learn? What are the things that I can do better without a lot of coaching and feedback? So I'm now going to cut to Q&A. I invite all of you who came to, you'll get this deck afterward along with the citations. But I invite all of you to reach out to me personally if you'd like to learn more about this. I can point you to all sorts of resources that you can go chase. If anyone's thinking about applications, obviously you can check out the website or ask me about it. But let me start with Q&A. So I got one question that says, is this meant to like help me be more successful if I want to be an employee in any field? And the answer is essentially yes. there are some fields where this matters more, where these skills matter more. And so I think you're probably referring to this slide in particular, where hey, are these skills equally applicable to any field? In complex work, more or less. So certainly like anything from marketing to project management to product management to sales to engineering to management to consulting to to actually teaching as well, medicine, etc. The let me define complex work versus just difficult. So complex work is work where there are a lot of decisions that need to be made by you. And like sort of like again, the aperture is pretty open to making them. My favorite example of a job that is difficult, very difficult, but not particularly complex in this way is being an airline pilot. So an airline pilot's job is to follow the book. Now, there are some very rare instances where, like, I mean, maybe you've seen, I forget the name of the movie, maybe it's Sully, but it's about Sully, played by Tom Hanks, where he went off the book, right? And he saved a bunch of people because he went off the book. And but he was gonna be like, he was in trouble for going off the book. Originally, he had to like prove beyond reasonable doubt that like going off the book was the only thing that could have saved all these people to like not be in trouble with the FAA. Forget if he's probably not going to go to jail, but I think he's going to be not a pilot anymore, right? So their job is to follow the book, not make decisions, right? Do the thing the book says. So that's a not so complex but very difficult job. The more complex the job is, the more it's interacting with people, the more there are decisions to make, the more like the thing to do is not necessarily clear, right? Like an engineer, for example, I keep thinking of them because I am one. You get presented a problem. How do I get there? I don't know. That's the most complex. So, great. So, great question. So, wouldn't firms/companies just use the characteristic test to measure the level of soft skills a candidate inhabits, such as Myers-Briggs or others? So, I'll start with the second part. Myers-Briggs definitely does not measure how strong you are in anything, right? There are, I think, 16 Myers-Briggs. You'll always get one of them. And that's more your personality. It's more your propensity towards something. So, for example, sometimes people mistake like someone who is extroverted with someone who is emotionally intelligent. Extroversion just means you like people. I know a lot of people are very extroverted, but like not really aware of how everybody else feels. And some people who are a little more introverted, they don't get energy out of spending time with people, but they are very emotionally intelligent. So it's a different battery of tests. But can companies or firms, use these tests to measure how strong you are in these? Absolutely. It's becoming a little bit more popular. I remember when I was in like the startup world out in California, a lot of companies, I was head of people, a lot of companies were trying to sell me like, hey, you can use this software to run these tests to actually see how strong people are in adaptability, emotional intelligence, resilience, etc. Or even honesty and integrity exams, which is interesting. I tested some of them. I actually really liked them. There were some reasons we didn't end up using them, and the biggest reason actually was that it was a turnoff for potential employees. They didn't like them, and so I think recruiters would love to use them, but since it is a turnoff for employees, like employees are like, hey, just imagine it's like, oh, you're trying to get into my head, like what's going on? It's unfortunate because it's a really good way of assessing people and assessing their ability to match a role. And so I think one, they do when they want to. Two, when they do. Two, they don't do it as much as they'd like to. And three, whether or not they like, if they measured them, developing these attributes actually gives you even more of an advantage because you'd be able to score really well in the interview and you wouldn't have to show that you're adaptable in some other way. Like demonstrating it is not the easiest thing. And so whether or not it's measured, you still want to get better in them, especially as a young person. That's my program. What are the benefits of joining this program and how can it elevate me to new heights? The name does not, so I promise this is not a mole or a plant of mine. So thank you, Trey. for like giving me the like advertising opportunity. I'm going to keep it super brief because my website like does all that explaining. But the short version is like the role of Futures Forge is to, it's the Skills to Success program is 2 weeks. We're building a semester program. And in the semester program, my promise is like, if you spend 6 months with me, you can come out and you can do anything. I'm only going to take you if you're smart. But if you're smart and you spend 6 months with me, you can come out, you can do anything in the world. You don't have the certification to do anything in the world, but you can go figure out how to figure out anything in the world. You can go start a company, you can go be a McKinsey consultant. I don't care. Because you'll just be the best. So that's my like audacious promise for the 6 months. But for a 2 week period, there's only like the amount of progress that we make during that 2 weeks is noticeable, right? So if you go to our parents page, the parents are like, wow, like there is a meaningful, noticeable difference from my student. And the students are saying the same thing. The thing that really changes is your rate of development, because you come out understanding like abstractly how to do this, but you've also had success with it, right? You've also had success with like, oh, I can like rapidly upskill as a problem solver, as an emotionally intelligent teammate in this 2 week period. And so you like, if you think of like your rate of learning over time, it goes like, but the thing that really matters is your rate of development afterward is higher than it was before, because you know how to do it. You know you can win. Like it's motivating to win. It's a little bit like if I had to lose weight. And starting is really hard, but once you get going, you've got some momentum. Yeah, let's go, right? This is why motivation is one of those major performance factors, right? When you're motivated, you can do it. And so we help students actually become more motivated to keep doing this, because they're able to see not only that it's important, because like they go through these challenges like, oh, if I had adapted more, but they know that they can improve in it and how to do so. And so they end up doing more of it afterward. So that's the promise of the 2 week program. Once we've worked together, oh, great. Once we've worked to gain these skills, how do we present them to the work field? Seems like the skills would be seen through on the job, not as a hiring benefit. Indeed. So part of the, so candidate selection is like kind of a classic challenge. For the most complex work, they'll always put you through tests, right? So software engineers have to like do tests. They have to do, and good firms will not just have like some kind of abstract problem. They will to just kind of test like, are you real? But they'll also give you something like more real and more hard. They'll have you present your results back. And they'll throw wrenches at you, because like that is the nature of engineering. For like getting into, if you're getting into McKinsey, if you want to go to McKinsey, or if you want to go to like a top, kind of like a top firm or top employer out of college, in addition to your resume, and your resume is important, in addition to your resume, you will go through a battery of tests that are designed to test these. And that is how you'll show them off during an interview process. If you're being hired for a job that doesn't have any testing, any like performance testing, they just look at your resume and talk to you a little bit and then decide, it's either not a very high demand job, or like just their team has not figured out how to be rigorous in recruiting yet, right? So bigger firms that are a little more established, or firms that are a little more on the cutting edge, use these tests more. And I don't mean, I said they don't test, right? I don't mean the written tests of like, hey, are you adaptable? I mean like the challenges or the take-home projects or like the live coding examples. That stuff's still very, very accepted by candidates, and they do a lot of that. So that's the short version. The other thing is like, you will, I know for me, one of the things that got me the job at Stroud coming out of MIT was that I had really, really good references from my internships. Because at my internship, like I worked hard and I got results. And I presented well, and I worked well with teammates. And that mattered in getting the job as well. And so some of this stuff is like cumulative, right? Like, dude, get a summer job. Like, get a summer job, work hard, have a great reference from your boss at age 16, helps you get a job at 17, at 18. And then when you're looking for internships as a freshman, when you have real job experience with people who because you're adaptable and gritty and resilient and a good teammate and conscientious and all that stuff, you have bosses who are like really impressed by you, right? I was a cook in high school. My cooking job helped me get an engineering internship at college, because people are like, this guy knows how to work. So there's a few angles to it. Oh. What are some jobs that I can get as a high school student that showcase and prove the skills that were mentioned? For example, adaptability. Great. Well, I just got it. This is a good transition. I think as a high school student, like a job where you are responsible is the most important thing. So I know like a lot of my students at Futures Forge, like I want like an internship or like a research opportunity at age 16. I'm like, I don't know how you do that. It feels like the kind of thing where you'd have to like ask somebody a favor. Uh, like I know, your parent knows a scientist. I wouldn't rely on it. And I think also like, I don't know, you're just not qualified as a high schooler to work in a scientific laboratory. Like undergrads are barely qualified. Like MIT undergrads like had to like worm and wiggle their way in because the professors want to work with the grad students because the grad students are specialists, right? Um, and so like basically get a real job is my advice. Now this is like speaking a little bit from myself, but when I was a cook, like there was some stuff we had to like there were like definitely adaptability moments. And I won't get into like too many kind of war stories, but like at some point, like my boss wasn't there and I was the most senior at age 16. I wasn't the oldest, but I was by far the most senior person in the kitchen. And like I had to decide what to do. Um, and I was suddenly kind of in charge. And so those kinds of experiences are definitely going to like up level you in a big way that I think like, I run a summer program, but I think with just like an endless litany of summer programs, will fall short in developing these. Whereas I think real world experience is obviously a big fact, a big winner. John asks, is there a cost to attend Futures Forge? Yes, the Skills for Success program, definitely has a cost. It's $5,600 for the 2-week program. There is financial aid. So ability to pay, our goal is that ability to pay is not the factor that limits people coming. So last year, 60% of students had scholarships. We're working to expand our scholarship fund. If you know any donors who care about education or skills development, I'd love to speak to them because we'd always love to keep working that. And so if you're worried about your ability to pay, please go ahead and apply anyway, because we do have a financial aid system. It's the same system that private high schools use to determine ability to pay. We use some different numbers, right? Because we're not going to expect you to cut into your school budget, right? So we set that aside, but we use the same kind of system to determine ability to pay. There's a question, right, about measuring. So we're at 7:48. Oh, and we got so many good questions. So I'm taking way too long. So I got to keep these short. Regarding measuring the skills with assessments, aside from what you shared in your college applications, yeah. So the question is like, are employers using assessments besides stuff like the SAT? Definitely. If you look up, what are called like psychometrics or something like that, again, like for example, if you look at these attributes on the left, the only one the only standardized test, the only thing that's measured in standardized tests is cognitive ability, right? SAT, ACT, stuff like that do actually a pretty good job. They correlate pretty well with IQ, not perfectly. But these other things, great resilience, motivation, all those, like right now, we only see kind of like the results of them, which is why we care about like people's jobs and stuff like that. And we want to hear references like, hey, what happened? Like on a reference call, I ask like, what does this person do when things go wrong? Right? That's what I want to know. And so that's how I always test stuff right now. But there are these written exams for like, for measuring how motivated you are by like doing a sort of a questionnaire thing. So they're not popular, but that's the idea. Got a question, which is the program. What's the program location, length, time, and cost? It's 2 weeks. You can if you go to futuresforge.org, you will get all of these answers as well. But the short version is it's 2 weeks. I don't know the difference between length of time. So 2 weeks, we talked about costs, and it's at Boston University. Selection process and criteria, another good one. So also on the website. So very briefly, I want a standardized test that demonstrates intelligence, including the PSAT. So that's how a lot of high school students apply, is using the PSAT. IQ test work as well. We also will run the Ravens progressive matrices for anyone who doesn't have a standardized test. And then we have a take-home project and an interview with one of my senior facilitators. Average IQ of Futures Forge employees. It's an odd question. That's interesting. Um, I've not actually done that math, and I I could try to estimate it live based on SAT score. But short version is everyone we work with SATs, including like the college students that we recruit to do our facilitation, everyone's SAT score is well above 1450. That's kind of a standard that we use, and a lot of the employees, they're much higher. We've got some 1600s. So that's sort of the short version. Is there's the facilitators will be as smart or smarter as the students in the room, because I agree with you who asked. That's very important. One more question. Where the students stay on the campus during the duration. So yes, so this is a residential program. One of the things that this is also a little bit of kind of like that like, it's like unofficial but like real world responsibility building stuff that that goes down, that I think is really important. A little bit why I just like, like I should have put on this presentation, like also just get a job, like in addition to all of those, like, model UN and stuff, like get a darn job and you will develop a lot of this. So it's a residential program for a lot of reasons. Students stay on campus. We stay in triples. I stay on campus. All the facilitators stay on campus. I have a dorm. Like, I sleep in a little twin bed, which is like, I'm a big guy. It's tough, but it's a lot of fun. Students bond. They'll work on stuff in the evening. We've got a dining hall. We stay on the East Campus side rather than the West Campus, in case you're curious. That's, I think, actually the building location might be on the website. It's the same one we did last year, same dorm. Dining hall's right nearby, classrooms right nearby. And one of the cool things about it is, like, there's laundry in the basement with quarters. Like, figure it out. We'll help you, but like, we'll help you when you have like done the research online of like, how do I do laundry? And you come to us, you're like, here's where I'm stuck. Or like you lose someone lost their key to the room. They came to me and they said, I lost my key. I said, great. What are you going to do about it? And they're like, right. The adult's not just going to solve the problem for me. Right. I said, what might you do? Like, you've got my number. So if you get really stuck, you can get my help. But like, what would you do? And they're like, I guess I'd go to the front desk. Like, cool, start there. Worked, right? And so I think like the students stay on campus, all the facilitators stay. So we've got a good like chaperone ratio. All the, and the experience is really good for them. We're putting up a blog post recently about like how being late to class taught some people some really good lessons, which I really liked, because nobody's gonna, mom and dad aren't dropping them off, teacher's not getting them. Like, we start class when we start class. Average, someone asked average SAT score. I've already mentioned that. What's the minimum age of future Forge employee? 20, because we need to be older than the students. So. And that's for the facilitators who join us over the summer. So we're looking for, Ivy plus, kind of top 50 college, obviously high SAT score, and and 20 or older to be a facilitator of Futures Forward. So yes, if there's any students at a prestigious university who want to join us this summer as a facilitator, it's also a great experience. There's some stuff on the website about the facilitators. And their experience and how much they learned, because we really put you through the ringer as a facilitator to get trained up, because you've got to be able to coach this stuff, right? So, and we expect more of you. So the challenges are much harder. The feedback is very blunt. You learn very quickly, and it's it reflects a lot of what we did at the consulting firm. Where it's just kind of like no nonsense, but all the facilitators. Again, you go look at their videos; they'll say some great things about the time they had. So, great. I know we're basically at time. I love the suite of questions that I got. I'm going to go back to the contact screen so that anyone who wants to like jot down my email last minute can do so. The biggest thing I hope that you take away from this, like, look, obviously I run a summer program. I want talented students to come join us. That's a really I love doing this. Like, I cried a lot as people left each of the sessions last year. I'm really like, I'm living my joy. So I want people to be part of it. But the thing that's most important, like the thing for me that is going to matter when I am on my deathbed, is not that like Futures Forge made the most money. The thing that matters to me most is that we started to change the world in a way that really mattered. Where like there's this very clear gap between like what we invest all of our time teaching and learning, and what is the stuff that really helps us in the future, like helps us in our career. And I want to close that gap, right? Or at least be the bridge between it, or whatever the analogy is. That's what I want. And I want like the rest of the world to be doing this too, right? So I want the people who like don't do futures forward, it's just not the right thing for them for some reason, to like, kind of demand it of someone else, or like go to the first robotics team, right? Like I want the high school students like go to their first robotics coach and be like, why aren't you giving us more feedback? Right? Like that's where the world changes. And so that's what I want you guys to do. I want you guys to know what it takes, right? You know the skills, a little bit about the methodology. It's these like project-based things with feedback. Some of the ways you can go get it. Some of it's by joining us. Some of it's right at your school. And some of the things that you can like, some of the spice you can add to it, such as like your feedback team, to be able to really crank things up. This is the way I want the world to change. And so I hope that everybody who saw this, I spent a lot of time in the science, was sufficiently convinced that about like my key points about why this matters and how to do it, and etc. That you want to go take action. And if you want a little advice from me on how to do that, send me an email. You know how to do it. So I'm gonna check one more time for any more Q&A. Nope. Cool. I got everything. So you'll get this deck, you'll get this recording. Everyone, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the great questions. It was like it's a real treat when I get the good crunchy stuff. I had a really wonderful time, and I hope to meet some of you maybe this summer. And if not, go be the most brilliant version of yourself that you can be. Look for us for like videos, blogs, stuff like that, stuff that can like help guide you as well as we can. And everyone have a great night. Thank you.